I knew from the time that I was 19 years old that I wanted to be in the fight business.
When you hear the words visionary and multi-billion-dollar empire, who comes to mind? What if I told you that the most overlooked entrepreneur of our generation might be this music guy?
I don't give a...
In the last 20 years, Dana White turned a bankrupt company into one of the biggest sports promotions in the world. Everyone says, wow, that's the greatest investment in the history of mankind. But let me tell you the rest of the story, because you don't accomplish that without making a few enemies. There are plenty of people who would like to see Dana fall, some coming from unexpected places. He's not a good person. He seems to have lost his character along the way, critics say. Yet, standing in Dana's shadow are a few powerful men who operate away from the spotlight. Together, they turned what was once an illegal operation into the fastest growing sport of our generation. As Dana famously declared, someday everyone will talk about the UFC. This is the sport of the future. The story starts when the UFC was dying. At UFC 27, there was no energy, no merchandise, and no hope for the brand. Lorenzo Fertitta and his brother Frank, owners of Station Casinos, attended the event and immediately saw potential. Imagine if they did this. Imagine if they did that. This thing could be big, Lorenzo said. Their vision would soon collide with Dana White's relentless ambition. The UFC was founded in 1993 by Rorion Gracie, Art Davie, and Bob Merowitz under Semaphore Entertainment Group, SEG. However, its brutal marketing tactics caught the attention of Senator John McCain, who called it human cockfighting, and led a campaign to ban it from pay-per-view and across states. This sent the company into a financial freefall. By UFC 27, SEG was desperate, and Dana White saw an opportunity. Dana's background was far from glamorous. He grew up with an absent, alcoholic father and a hard-working single mother. After bouncing between jobs, including working as a bellman, Dana realized he wanted to be in the fight business. Managing fighters like Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz, Dana eventually learned that the UFC was up for sale. He called Lorenzo Fertitta and said, "These guys are in big trouble. I think we can buy it." In 2001, Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta bought the UFC for $2 million. They created a parent company called Zuffa and made Dana the president, giving him 10% ownership. The challenges they faced were monumental. The UFC had lost all its licensing rights, wasn't allowed on pay-per-view, and was banned in most states. To legitimize the sport, they adopted unified rules, partnered with athletic commissions, and brought in industry experts like Mark Ratner to secure regulation. Despite their efforts, the UFC burned through $44 million with little success. Lorenzo even considered selling it for $6 million. But one fateful day, he said, "F*** it. Let's keep going." That decision led to a Hail Mary, creating a reality TV show called The Ultimate Fighter. The show acted as a weekly infomercial for the UFC, showcasing fighters living in a house, training, and competing for a UFC contract. The finale of The Ultimate Fighter became a turning point. It featured one of the most iconic fights in MMA history and skyrocketed the UFC into mainstream consciousness. From there, the company never looked back, growing into the multi-billion-dollar empire it is today. The rise of the UFC is not just a story about business. It's a tale of grit, vision, and overcoming the odds. Dana White, Lorenzo Fertitta, and their team transformed a dying brand into one of the most successful and controversial sports organizations in history. Whether you admire them or not, their impact on the sports world is undeniable. In its early days, MMA struggled to find a foothold on cable TV, with the UFC investing $10 million in a final attempt to bring the sport to prominence. Desperate for exposure, the UFC approached Viacom's Spike Network, branded as the Men's Network. After numerous rejections and resistance from television executives, Spike agreed to air the UFC content for free, with production costs covered by the UFC. Surprisingly, the show became an overnight success. But Spike's leadership changes nearly derailed plans for a second season. The turning point came during the finale, where a fight between Stephen Bonner and Forrest Griffin captivated viewers, skyrocketing ratings and cementing the UFC's future. Deals were made, literally on a napkin, ensuring a second season and setting the stage for future growth. Spike TV expanded UFC programming with Unleashed, Fight Nights, and Countdowns, creating a self-sustaining loop of free content, pay-per-view events, and ancillary products. Meanwhile, in Japan, Pride FC, a significant competitor, fell under allegations of Yakuza ties. Cable companies severed ties, leaving Pride bankrupt, and the UFC seized the opportunity to buy them out, acquiring fighters and a valuable library of content. The UFC strategically aired free fights during competitor pay-per-views, effectively eliminating rivals like WEC and Strikeforce, both of which were eventually absorbed by the UFC. In 2011, the UFC secured a landmark deal with Fox, fulfilling a long-term goal of reaching mainstream audiences. Despite challenges, including accusations of monopoly practices and fighter pay issues, the UFC continued to expand globally, leveraging fighters like Georges St-Pierre, Michael Bisping, Ronda Rousey, and Conor McGregor to open markets in Canada, the UK, and beyond. The organization also tackled regulatory hurdles, such as getting MMA legalized in New York after years of lobbying. By 2016, the UFC was sold to WME IMG Endeavor for $4.02 billion, marking the largest transaction in sports history at the time. Despite massive debts, the UFC thrived under new leadership, securing a $1.5 billion deal with ESPN, increasing its valuation to $7 billion. In 2020, the pandemic tested the UFC's resilience. While other sports shut down, Dana White's team innovated with Fight Island in Abu Dhabi, ensuring events continued. The UFC gained new fans from the sports betting community, and its audience grew by 46%, solidifying its position as one of the top 4 sports in the US. Throughout this journey, the UFC exemplified grit, vision, and an aggressive strategy of acquisition and innovation, overcoming challenges to achieve global dominance. Despite controversies around fighter pay and monopoly claims, the UFC's meteoric rise is a testament to its leadership's relentless determination and adaptability. The UFC's journey into mainstream success wasn't just about innovation or perseverance. It was also about taking calculated risks, often with the odds stacked against them. When Dana White and the Fertitta brothers purchased the organization in 2001, they inherited a product tainted by bad press and political resistance. Mixed martial arts was still viewed by many as barbaric, a glorified blood sport. Politicians like Senator John McCain famously called it human cockfighting, making it nearly impossible to find venues or broadcasters willing to host events. The UFC's early financial losses painted a grim picture, but their ambition remained unwavering. The first step in changing public perception came with the establishment of new regulations under the unified rules of MMA. These rules created structure and legitimacy, moving the sport away from its no-holds-barred origins. Weight classes, round limits, and stricter safety protocols gave the UFC a foundation to market itself as a legitimate sport rather than a spectacle. These changes were pivotal in opening doors to state athletic commissions and potential broadcasters. However, legitimacy alone wasn't enough to solve the financial hemorrhaging. Events were struggling to turn a profit, pay-per-view buys were inconsistent, and the Fertitta brothers were losing patience. The situation came to a head with their final $10 million investment into The Ultimate Fighter, a gamble that paid off in ways no one anticipated. The series introduced the UFC to mainstream audiences, turning fighters into relatable personalities and heroes. Fans connected with their struggles, training regimens, and rivalries setting the stage for broader acceptance of MMA as a sport. The iconic finale between Stephan Bonnar and Forrest Griffin marked a watershed moment. Their fight wasn't just thrilling, it became a cultural phenomenon, showcasing the drama and athleticism of MMA to millions of new viewers. This was the UFC's ticket to a second chance, leading to more seasons of The Ultimate Fighter and a stronger relationship with Spike TV. The show became a recruitment pipeline, discovering stars who would carry the organization for years. As the UFC gained momentum, it adopted a relentless strategy to dominate the MMA landscape. Dana White's vision revolved around not just growing the sport, but owning it entirely. This meant eliminating competition through strategic acquisitions and aggressive tactics. When rival promotions showed potential, the UFC either bought them outright or rendered them irrelevant. Organizations like WEC and Strikeforce had built their own followings with unique fighters and events. But the UFC's purchase of these companies turned them into feeder leagues, bolstering the UFC's roster while neutralizing competition. The acquisition of Pride FC in 2007 was perhaps the most significant coup in this strategy. Pride had been the UFC's most formidable rival. Through it all, Dana White's mantra of refusing to take no for an answer has defined the UFC's journey. From its near collapse in the early 2000s to its current status as a sports juggernaut, the UFC has proven that vision, determination, and a willingness to take risks can overcome even the most insurmountable challenges. As the sport continues to grow, its impact on the world of athletics and entertainment will be felt for generations to come.